I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Hello to everyone listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are, and especially welcome to our new Pacifica stations who are listening all over the country. So thanks for listening. And what you are listening to is For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your coworkers and your pets and the birds and the bees and the trees and the fish in the seas and everyone and everything, because like it or not, we're all of us together wrapped up on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show for you today. A little bit of a challenging show for you this week because, I just got off the train. Those of you who listen regularly know that my preferred method of travel is train. And I just had a 21-hour train ride coming up from Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'd gone down visiting my sister. And I also don't have my coworker. I don't have my fantastic co-host, Rebecca Wood. She is feeling poorly. She was out last week because she wasn't feeling too well, and unfortunately, she just felt worse during the week, and she actually has a fairly serious bout with the flu. She went to the ER yesterday, got some meds. So she might call in for a little bit, but we're not counting on it. But let's all hope she gets better quickly. So, but after we have our little chat here at the beginning for the next 10 minutes or so, hopefully we're going to get a call from Vina Colley, who's down there in Piketon, Ohio, who's fighting. We've had her on before. She is fighting the plan to put nuclear power plants down there and to start reprocessing nuclear waste again, which has resulted in horrible contamination of that whole region. They had to abandon a school a few years back, and what they're trying to do it again. Basically, they made this tremendous mistake. They polluted their whole region with the nuclear industry, and there's been billions of dollars spent on cleaning up the mess that they made trying to get nukes going. And so some bright people down there in Piketon was like, "Hey, let's do that again." And so we're going to talk to Vina Colley about that from the organization Press, and then we will hear from our wonderful patrons, the people of whom we are quite fond. And after that, it will be ecological news from around the world. And hopefully, fingers are crossed, and this is an especially good day to do this. Hopefully, we'll also hear from you, that you'll call in at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can text. You can text 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. We'd be happy to read your text on the air. So, as I said, I just got back from a trip down to North Carolina, and as usual, I had to make some I can't help myself. Whenever I'm driving through the countryside, or whenever I take any sort of trip or travel, I always make eco observations. I kind of visually check the health of the ecosystems down there. And unfortunately, there's several things going on down in North Carolina right now that are very troubling. One is, of course, the invasive species, the plants such as kudzu and especially bamboo. I've been sort of watching the bamboo the whole time. My sister's lived down there for just about 20 years now, almost exactly 20 years. I've been visiting her periodically. And 20 years ago, there were a few little stands of bamboo here and there, 4 or 5 feet tall, whatever. Now, those have grown up, and I literally saw 30, 35-foot tall bamboo down there. And they are, the bamboo, because most of what the bamboo is the root, is under the ground. It's kind of like a glacier tip of the iceberg thing. What you see on top is actually not the main part of the plant, but they're getting huge and they are crowding other things out. And once they get going, they're very difficult to eradicate. And they're not making it any easier because the other thing that's going on big time that I was able to see from the train and when I was driving around was deforestation. A lot of the woods down there, a lot of the forests that have been there for like 100 years, based on the size and shape of the trees, they're just clear cutting them. They're just 100% taking it back down to dirt, and that there's hundreds and hundreds of acres like that have been forest for a long time. And part of the reason for that, and that's the third big eco observation down there, is that they are more and more getting into they're getting into subdivisions. They're building gigantic subdivisions with the cookie cutter house. It's the little 2-story house, which is about 1/3 garage, and it's really, really distressing because they are doing this at a breakneck pace. There's one development down there that got going that my sister actually fought. She and her friends who live she lives in Pittsboro, North Carolina. They fought it for about 12 years. They fought it on environmental grounds and all sorts of grounds, but it's finally gone in, and it's if you can imagine this, it's a subdivision. That is 30,000 units. And so it more than tripled the population of Pittsboro. Pittsboro was just this sleepy little town, and now the traffic is incredible. It's really crowded downtown. And these are people that were living in the bigger cities like Raleigh and decided they wanted that American dream, so they move out to a little place like Pittsboro, and then they completely level, thousands, tens of thousands of acres, and they're still doing it. That's the thing, is a lot of times that once that initial dam gets broken, once the resistance is gone, or is defeated, then they immediately press their advantage, and there's proposals for like a half a dozen more of these, and they're having trouble meeting the needs. They're having trouble, responding to the demands on the ecosystems and on the infrastructure. The roads are getting worn down quicker, and they're having trouble supplying all these houses, all these people with water, clean water. And it's just, ecologically speaking, it's better to have people in the cities where you can sort of, for the same amount of heat, you can heat like a dozen people living in apartment buildings than you have if you've got a dozen houses. It's much bigger ecological footprint, especially once they start getting their lawns going and start spraying herbicides and pesticides everywhere. And so it's kind of depressing, but there's also nice aspects to it in that they are friendly people down there, and my sister is involved with this. They redeveloped an industrial plant and they call it the plant, and they're trying to do all kinds of. They're trying to be a very environmentally, how do I put it, environmentally responsible development. They've got a banks of electric car chargers, and you've got stores in there selling organic food and home brewed beers, and they have a tree garden where they're trying to plant and preserve species, the very same species that they're cutting down to build the subdivisions. They're creating a tree garden to try to save and salvage. And some of the restaurants there grow their own food that they serve at the restaurant in gardens around this plant. So it's not all terrible. It's not all just doom and gloom, but it's not as good as it was in terms of environmental balance and so forth. So let's see. We should be hearing from our guest pretty soon here. Jared, have we got anybody? No. All right. Well, then we're going to go on with Plan B here. So I actually, actually the lack of our guest means that the line is open for anybody who wants to call at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. So I stayed with my sister down there for a few days after I brought her the car, which was a cute little Fiat that had standard shift. It's been a long time since I've driven a standard, and they're lots of fun. Shifting gears and things. A lot of young people today have literally never driven a standard. They're better in several ways. One is that they do get better gas mileage. You pay a price in gas mileage for the car to do all the shifting for you. So you could really be very fuel conscious, miles per gallon conscious, using a standard car. And it was a long drive. It was about 20 hours of driving from where I went to get to her house. But her house is really interesting. Her lifestyle is very. They don't call it a homestead. They're like, no, we're not homesteaders. But to start off with, they live in a small house, a very tiny house with, what would be called a tiny house. It does have 2 stories with the bedrooms upstairs and like a living room and kitchen, bathroom downstairs. So you start out small, and so they don't need much resources to keep their house clean or warm in the winter, or cold, cool in the summer. They, in fact, they managed to do all their heating with wood heat. And I know wood heat is not the greatest environmentally speaking, because, it puts, smoke into the air, and we literally can't all just switch to wood heat, because we would have to burn every tree on the continent in a couple of winters just to stay warm. And they almost did that down in New York City. Before they went to coal, they were burning wood, charcoal, and that's how the entire Adirondack mountain range got denuded. And that was an interesting story. So, not wood heat isn't for everybody, but what they do is there's a program down there where you can tell landscapers, you can say, hey, we'll take your wood. And so when landscapers have to take down a tree, instead of just bringing it to the dump, they actually cut it up and dump it and drop it off at houses like the ones my sister has. And so they're burning wood that would have just gone into a landfill. And so that actually, environmentally speaking, that's an advantage, because if you put wood into a landfill, it may not decompose if there's no water, but if there is water in there, what it does is it generates methane. It just doesn't break down into mostly CO2 like it does if you burn it. So that's nice. That's a small house. They heat it with wood. They also raise their own chickens and rabbits. And the chickens are really, they have a couple acres, which is almost all wooded. They don't really have a lawn that they mow. And the chickens are wandering in and out of these woods. And they round them up every night to put them in the chicken coop to sleep. But they've got quite the personality. Every one of those chickens is like a unique individual, and they know them all by name, and they have relationships with them. and they supply tons of eggs. My sister has, beaucoup eggs. And luckily in North Carolina, selling eggs is actually fairly unregulated. If you want to sell rabbit meat, you have to have like a stainless steel sink, and you have to have, you have to meet all these regulations. So it's very difficult to go into that business. They raise their own rabbits for their own meat, but they don't actually sell them because it's too expensive a proposition to get started. But they are able to sell their eggs, and their eggs are delicious. I had, as you might guess, we had eggs in almost every meal we cooked there, and super fresh, really tasty. And it's just a reminder that, and of course, because they have such a small house, when they do their cooking, they're not heating with methane. They've got one little propane tank. That's what they cook with. And it's just a reminder that we don't really need to do all this stuff in terms of what we use energy for. The energy that we're fighting for down in the Gulf of Mexico right now, the oil and the methane gas, a lot of that is being used for stuff that it's kind of nice that we can do it. But when you get right down to essentials, we don't need nearly as much as what we're doing. And in fact, we waste a good percentage. We waste more than 10% of the energy that we get is wasted. And you can also add to that the fact that 40% of the energy that we get from fossil fuels, like oil and natural gas, 40% of that is used just to transport the fossil fuels. So those big tankers that are waiting to get through the Straits of Hormuz, the fuel that they burn, because they're burning diesel, and the fuel that they burn by the ton, because every trip of every one of those super tankers takes tens of thousands of tons of diesel fuel. Every one of those trips, that adds up to 40% of what we use fossil fuels for. And so add the 10% of that's wasted, just plain old waste, to the 40% that's necessary to just move the stuff around. And, half of what we get out of the ground, half of what we're fighting for, is just energy that's used to maintain our current energy system. And it's crazy because, as we know now, and is happening rapidly around the rest of the world, we can meet all our energy needs with the wind and the sun and the batteries. We've had Dr. Mark Jacobson on several times. He's a Stanford engineer. He's done the math, but he's not alone. Hundreds of other researchers in this field have come to the same conclusion. And, he just came out with a book a few years ago, No Miracles Needed, where he detailed all this. And he just came out with another book, still No Miracles Needed is the title of that book. And so I recommend anybody who doubts this, go out, buy those books, or take them out of your local library. Look at his numbers. I mean, it's very plain. There's so much energy in the solar power, it actually dwarfs fossil fuel power. And so if we were to switch over to fossil fuel power, we could have all the benefits. We could cook, we can keep our place warm, we can keep it cool. We can do everything. We can watch streaming videos on TV. We can do everything that we do with fossil fuels right now, that we're doing with coal and methane and natural and oil. We can do that with wind and sun and storage. And just a really important reminder that what we're having here, we are fighting for a resource that is killing us. Okay. I just want to remind everybody again, it was 2 weeks ago that we first reported on the study that said the amount of CO2, the amount of bicarbonate in our blood is going up as the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere are going up. And they're not toxic yet, but according to the researchers who did the study, by 2070, the air itself will be toxic. We won't be able to breathe because the levels of bicarbonate will be so high that that we won't be able to basically have our metabolic processes won't work. We'll suffocate. Um, Now, I probably won't be around at that time. That would make me like 104 or 106 or something. But I don't want anybody to have to go through that because um, literally we're cooking ourselves. We're both by heat and we're asphyxiating ourselves now, it turns out. And we're expending enormous amounts of energy and capital and lives to maintain an energy system, which is just insane. And that's part of what I wanted to talk to Vina about is down there in Piketon, Ohio, where they had terrible contamination because they were reprocessing nuclear wastes, and plutonium dust has been found more than 6 miles outside of the Piketon reprocessing plant. And the government has already spent, I think it's $10.4 billion trying to clean it up. But part of what I wanted to talk to her about was the latest report from the company that's doing the cleanup. They monitor the groundwater, and the latest report is that they still found contamination in that groundwater. In other words, and some of the levels are actually increasing still. So even though they've spent tens of billions of dollars and many years trying to remediate this horribly toxic place, they're not succeeding. Their cleanup is failing. But B, a bunch of Trump officials were just down there this past week with shovels because they want to build 2 new nuclear reactors there and 2 gigantic natural gas plants, 2 giant methane plants, and because they want to put data centers there. So it's like a triple threat. They want nukes and methane, and they want to waste all that power with these data centers, which I'm not convinced are going to improve our lives any. I mean, we've already got the systems that keep us warm and keep us fed and keep us entertained. I don't see data centers being able to do any of that stuff better than we've already got it. It might be more profitable for people running the companies that supply us with energy and food and clothing and stuff because they can fire most of their employees and run everything using AI, AI that's being run through these data centers. But is that a societal benefit, really? I mean, nobody having any work? I don't know. This is a question that needs to be answered. And I'm sorry Vina didn't manage to call in order to talk about that. I hope nothing's wrong. And Jared, if she does call in, give me the signal and we'll talk to her. But I guess now it's time to move on. And once again, be great if we had some help at 877-909-1007. Just give us a call. So now it's time to thank our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They scrolled through looking for a level membership that matched their budget. And once they found it, they just signed up. And now every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. So thank you to our patrons. And I just want to say that if you want to make a one-time donation, what you do is you go in there and you set your own number. You would tell it, I want to give so much per month. When you start the membership, that comes out right away. The first donation happens as soon as you sign up, and then you just go back and cancel it, so that much doesn't come out every month, and that's how you can make a one-time donation. We're working on that. We're going to try to get it a little more streamlined, but that's the way to. If someone wanted to be a patron and help our show, they go to patreon.com, Patreon. Okay, on to ecological news. And our first story, it's kind of fun because this is a story in Renewables Now on March 13th, 2026. And the title of the story is Offshore Wind Reaches 100 Gigabytes. And the focus of this story is the fact that President Trump has gone on the international stage many times, notably at the United Nations and at Davos, and made just the outrageously false claim that China is producing wind turbines but isn't using wind turbines. That somehow this whole wind turbine industry in China is some kind of scam because they make them, but they don't use them themselves. They just sell them to suckers. And literally nothing could be further from the truth. There was an 8% increase in offshore wind over the last 12 months, and almost all wind increases are from China. And let's see, I think we got a text message here. Oh yes, we got a message from Carrie, who said that shipping is very dirty. In other words, shipping of fossil fuels is extremely dirty, and so the quicker we get off of it, the cleaner the entire environment will be. And that is very true. It takes tremendous resources to keep those ships going, and they have a tendency to spill oil, not just the exhaust from the diesel plants, but all kinds of chemicals are used to keep those big tankers running. And yeah, the quicker we stop having to have them, the fewer wars we'll have, and the cleaner the oceans will be. So actually, back to the wind turbine story. Actually, the story I'm quoting was in Renew Economy on March 16th, and the actual title was "No Wind Farms in China?" ? Trump claim torched by record year of new wind capacity, mostly in China. And so global wind went up. Globally, all wind was up 169 gigawatts in 2025. And that's the equivalent of 150 nuclear power plants or so. 8 of the top 10 firms putting up wind turbines are Chinese. That's from Bloomberg, and for them, 95% of the wind turbines they build are domestic. In other words, they are building them in China and they are using them in China. They're getting most of the wind turbines on the planet. The increase of 169 gigawatts, that represents a 38% increase in wind power from 2024 to 2025. Most of that was onshore wind. 95% of it was onshore wind. 8 gigawatts was offshore wind. And so China added more than 100 gigawatts of wind in a single year to their own grid. And so when a politician like Donald Trump gets up there on a public stage and makes an absolutely false statement, that just easily disprovable, and in fact that at both Davos and the UN, Chinese representatives were sitting right there, that they know the truth about their own country. When a politician is making a claim that outrageous, essentially what they're doing is a psychological control, because they're like, oh, do you even dare contradict me? Yeah, I know this is false, but I'm saying it because, I'm just proving that I'm dominating the situation, and you don't even dare say that I'm wrong, even when I'm saying something that's completely false. There is no truth at all to the claim that China is building and selling turbines but not using them. So the largest company in the world for wind now is a company called Goldwind, and the top 5 companies of doing wind power are all Chinese companies. Goldwind put up 29 gigawatts of that 100 plus gigawatts. The 5th largest company is a company called Dongfeng, and they put up 13.5 of those gigawatts. Vestas, the Danish company Vestas, is the largest non-Chinese wind company. They're 6th in the world, and they put up 10.6 gigawatts around the world. And as I said, 93% of all wind installations are in China. So the rest of the world, if you subtract out China, the growth of wind was still pretty healthy. It was still 17%. And interestingly, last year, India moved up to be the number 2 country in terms of installing wind, beating out both the U.S. and Germany, which in the past have been number 2 and number 3. And of course, we could thank our illustrious president for that, because he has he's very specific on being anti-wind and anti-solar. And so he has had an effect in terms of knocking us down from the number 2 position in wind, but he has failed miserably in discouraging wind around the world, because wind is still growing extremely healthy. Offshore wind, as I said, that's 8% of all wind, but China is looking at, they've got 1,100 gigawatts of offshore wind in the pipeline. And so, they're planning to do a lot more. And offshore wind, even though it's more expensive and it's a little more technically difficult, it's much more reliable. It's much more like a base load power, because it's almost always windy in the ocean. And the simple reason is that there's a larger, what they call draw. That is the length of time the wind can gather up speed before it runs into an obstacle, like a mountain or a building. And the longer the draw, the more power you get, because the wind sort of picks up momentum and picks up speed. And so when you've got turbines out on the ocean, you really generate a lot of power. And so this next year, there's 236 gigawatts coming online in China. But one thing I found very encouraging was that the rest of the world has 260 gigawatts of wind online. So even though China is the largest by far, everybody else is starting to catch up. Everybody else is taking a look and getting into this. So that's some good news. I have gotten a couple interesting texts here. Somebody's asking about vultures picking up cats. I don't know if people have heard about this. Have you heard about this? The idea that black vultures could swoop down and grab people's cats. Somebody's saying that they can't pick up a live, healthy cat. By the way, it's too heavy. Others saying that, the whole thing might be made up. I don't know. Have you heard of that? Have you heard of the cats re-entering the food chain because of vultures? I don't know. We'll look into that more next week. Okay. Well, but thanks for the texts. We appreciate every text, no matter how we like every single text. Just even if it's a sad story of cats being swooped down by vultures. Okay, next story. Very sad story. Nebraska. You might have heard of Nebraska's wildfires. There's 800,000 acres burning, and it's rapidly on its way to 1 million acres. This is not normal for Nebraska to be having wildfires in March. But these are the largest wildfires in Nebraska's history. So just in the spring, just as it's supposed to be kind of damp because the snow is melting and refilling the rivers and the ponds, and the earth is not supposed to be bone dry right now in Nebraska, but for the past week, they've had steady, very high winds, like we're talking 60-mile-an-hour winds, plus 80-degree plus temperatures all last week. So you get very high winds and very high temperatures, and they evaporate all that water that's supposed to be soaking into the ground and making the plains, wet so they can support plant life. But right now, the average humidity in Nebraska is only 15%. So it's very windy, very dry, very hot. I mean, more than 80 degrees. And that's why these fires have been burning out of control. There's been one death so far, an 86-year-old woman named Rose White, who had a ranch out there, and she was trying to escape her ranch, but she didn't make it. The governor of Nebraska, Governor Pillen, has declared a state of emergency. Now, on March 20th, NPR said that there were 4 separate fires of varying sizes. They said on March 20th they were largely contained, but they also said that this weekend was expected to be worse because the temperatures were going back up over 90 this weekend, which is more than 40 degrees above normal. And the winds were supposed to pick up again to 30 to 40 miles per hour sustained, which is more than enough to once again start those wildfires a burning. So this has been an insane week in terms of weather, and the left, the left side, the west side of the country has been unbearably hot. We're talking triple digit temperatures in places like Arizona, unheard of temperatures for March. Okay, March. It was literally just the first day of spring yesterday, so we were still in spring and we were having more than 100-degree temperatures. And again, I know that I'm talking to people who understand this already, for the most part. People who realize that, global warming is real, they want to do something about it. All the surveys say 70 to 80% of Americans understand this and want to do it, but we're being governed by that other 20%. And one of the main reasons I've did this show on a sports station, 100.7 FM, The Ticket, is because I do want to reach that other 20%, because those people are being used to power the anti-environmental movement, to power the anti-global warming movement, which is actually an anti-science movement and an anti-reason movement. Because, I have yet to hear any global warming denier explain to me how you can increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere without actually increasing the temperature, because since CO2 holds heat better, CO2 is going to make things warmer. And if Rebecca were here, right now I would say, and so what does this cause? And she would leap in saying, positive feedback loop, which, it can't get any clearer that we are in a positive feedback loop, that the global heating is causing more CO2, and more CO2 causes global heating, and they feed on each other, and they keep accelerating, and they're going to keep on accelerating until something gives, until we stop putting carbon in the air one way or the other. And better to do it sooner rather than later. Okay, and one of the ways we do that, going on to our next story, this is a story in cbc.ca. One of the ways we do that is we strengthen our energy systems using storage, using batteries. And the reason for this story was March 18th, and it was on Canada's public broadcast station, cbc.ca. And the title is, "This Company Says a Large-Scale Battery System Could Replace the Tantramere Gas Plant for half the cost." So what's happening in Ontario, they're in New Brunswick specifically, they're looking at building this gigantic 400 megawatt gas plant for $3.5 billion. And this is literally the worst time in history to be building new gas plants. I'm sorry. We know that they're killing us, and yet some people are insisting on building them anyway. But what the point of this story is that what's happening in a lot of these places, Canada too, not just the U.S., is politicians are making the arguments for increasing our production of CO2, for installing all these methane plants at precisely the time it's the most suicidal time in history to put methane plants in. And Canada, as I said, is no exception. The Premier, Susan Holt, went to their regulatory body that's considering approving this gas plant, and she basically did some Trump-style lying. What she said was, so the gas plant is going to cost $3.5 billion over 25 years, but that's the estimate now. But what's happening is she said that it's going to cost $10 billion to do the same with batteries. And so batteries are actually much cheaper. And so the story is the reaction from a company called Oneida Energy that already has built utility scale storage in Ontario. They've already got a 250 megawatt battery storage plant that can produce power for 4 hours, and that went online back in May of last year. And so they know what they're talking about. They have actual figures, actual numbers. And what they discovered was that once they ran those numbers, that they could build the same capacity as this gas plant. They could get 400 megawatts for 8 hours straight, or 200 megawatts for 16 hours. They could do that for 1.75 billion. So half the cost of the natural gas plant. And the reason, of course, is extremely simple. Gas plants, any plant that has fuel, you have to continuously buy fuel for them. If you ever stop buying fuel, the plant stops. Battery plants, once you put them in, all you have to do is have some kind of generation, and that could be anything. That could be gas, it could be wind, it could be solar, it could be geothermal, it could be tidal, any sort of energy. You just have to have some kind of energy being generated, and you never have to buy fuel again. You just take that energy, and when there's surplus, you stick it in the battery, and when you need it, you pull it out of the battery. And so that is simply what needs to happen. And this is happening, both in the U.S. and in Canada, apparently, because in both those places, the fossil fuel industry has really outsized impact on politicians. They have a lot of money to toss at politicians. And in fact, Ohio, it's been shown, or it's been pointed out, that the fracking industry in particular makes a lot of political donations. And in fact, we even have legislators that are in the fracking industry. We have several legislators that's what they do for a living is frack. And those same legislators are proposing rules and regulations that make it easier to frack. And they're the ones that are opening up our state parks to fracking. So this is a bad decision on Canada's part if they go with this methane. And of course, what we're learning and what the entire world is learning is that at the first hint of problems, at the first hint of instability of supply, the first time those tankers filled with liquid natural gas get held up, that skyrockets the price. You are literally at the mercy of all these other countries around the world that can stop the shipping for whatever political or economic reason they decide. We should have learned this, and we did kind of learn this lesson back in the 1970s with the first oil embargo, the first Arab oil crisis. What we did, that's when people first started talking seriously about switching over to wind and solar and that sort of distributed generation. But what we as a country chose to do instead, and I'm not saying that we as citizens necessarily chose this because, this was never on any ballot, but what we chose to do instead was to get such tight political control, such tight political binding with the countries that had done that oil embargo, with the countries of OPEC, that they would not ever do it again because it was just too lucrative for them to just keep pumping oil. We gave them tons and tons of money. And so that's why, OPEC has never done another oil embargo. Although once or twice they talked, like maybe we're going to do it. But it's been more than 50 years. If they were ever going to do it, they would have done it by now. But it's, like I say, it's just too lucrative for the ultra wealthy dictatorial families that run all those oil producing countries in the Midwest, in the West. And so what they have to do there, it's kind of interesting because those countries are actually now investing in solar and investing in hydrogen generation because they can see the handwriting on the wall. They know this isn't going to last forever, but for some reason we're pretending burning fossil fuels is going to be the way we always generate power when it's literally physically impossible for us to keep doing that. All right, well, we're going right along here. We're almost 3/4 through the show. And I'm reminded once again of why I asked Rebecca to join the show. This program started back in on the January first weekend of January back in 2019, and for about 6 months I did it this way. I did it solo, no co-host, and just me talking. And not only does it raise your blood pressure, it's really not nearly as much fun. I really enjoy having Becca here next to me, and hopefully she'll be back next week. Okay, next story. So we're going to stick with the whole idea of energy storage for a minute here. It's a story in PV Magazine on their website, ess-news.com. So it's Energy Storage Systems News.com. Story back on March 4th. And title is World's Largest Compressed Air Energy Storage Station Now Fully Operational in China. And so once again, China running rings around everybody else, doing laps around the rest of us. China has created a 600 megawatt, that's almost half the size of a nuclear power plant, 600 megawatt compressed air storage system. And so what happens with that, very simply, when you've got extra energy, when you're producing more than you need, you use it to take pumps and you compress air, you push it down, and you just like in a cylinder of gas that you might get from that you might see at a welding place or something, you fill a chamber, and what they're filling with this is salt caverns, giant salt caverns, which are pretty much sealed. There's not, you don't have a lot of holes, you don't have a lot of water coming in and out of salt caverns. They're geologically, they are very stable, and they're self-contained, which is why they looked at putting nuclear waste there for a long time. But that also was a bad idea, which they didn't follow up on. But they have now, they pump those chambers full of air under high pressure, and it's enough energy stored that way to provide 2,400 megawatt hours of storage. In other words, basically, it's like being able to run a nuclear power plant for 10 days. That's how much energy they were able to store in this salt storage site. It's twice as big as the next biggest net or compressed air storage, which also is in China. That's a 300 megawatt storage that actually came online in December of 25. But it's smaller than the next one they've got coming, which is going to be a 700 megawatt compressed air storage. And compressed air storage is sort of ideal ecologically speaking, because you don't need lithium, you don't need rare earth metals, you don't need anything except some steel and some rubber to have, to have seals and things so that the air doesn't all leak out. And it can be used over and over again. Salt chambers don't wear out. You don't have to replace them after 10 years or whatever. They're, as I said, they're geologically very stable, and you're just pumping compressed air into these enclosed spaces. And so people have talked about compressed air storage. In fact, we have some large limestone caverns in central Ohio that they've actually were considering using for compressed air storage. But as is happening more and more often, people have been talking about it, but China just went ahead and did it. And it's an important part. It's a minor part. You don't have these nice salt chambers everywhere on the earth, but where you do have them, it's nice. Okay, all right. So last story, and as I say, hopefully we still have some time for somebody to call in, 877-909-1007, to comment on anything you've heard about here today. But the last story is going back to what happened last year, almost at this time, back in on April 28th, 2025. What happened was the grid in Spain collapsed. They had a huge blackout, and what the anti-renewable forces did immediately was seized upon that and blamed it all on wind and solar. They said, "Oh, you're depending too much on wind and solar power. That's why your grid collapsed, and look how horrible wind and solar power is. Oh, be fearful, blah, blah, blah." And of course, what they finally did was they released a study. They had the title of this was, and this was from entsoe.eu, ENSO, and it says ENSO publishes expert final report on April 28th, 2025, blackout in Spain and Portugal. And what happened was oscillations. They had oscillations in power, plus gaps in voltage, gaps in reactive power. In other words, the backup power that has to come on. Do we have a caller, Jared? Yeah. Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Let's go to the caller. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi. Hey, Joe.
Hi.
I was thinking, since you were talking about data centers, I've been thinking about that a lot. I worked in IT for a lot. I retired from that business. I can tell you from my experience, they have all the data centers they need if they want to do AI. I mean, what they want to do, in my opinion, is to create more space for biometrics, for eavesdropping on people, for speculating on what they want to buy, blah blah blah. And I also agree that AI is a scam. It's a hoax. Not that it doesn't do some things, but it can't do anything that a human can't already do. That's a fact. So, yeah.
Right.
So that's my opinion on it. But it really bugs me. I'm really proud of the local communities. I don't know how the heck it got out of the gate in Wood County without people being able to stop it. But, well, I do know sort of, because Wood County is very conservative, and they grab money as quick as they can offer to them. But, yeah. So, but it doesn't create jobs. Those things are going to sit there virtually run by themselves once they're put up. Mm-hmm. If anybody needs to do anything, they'll fly in, they'll fly out. That's just, it's a no-win for local communities, in my opinion. So that's it.
Well, lots of people share that opinion, but as to how they managed to do it, Wood County, basically the answer is secretly. They had legislators sign non-disclosure agreements, and most people had no idea.
And I personally know someone who's in politics down there, so I know the ilk. But it's just like you have to wonder also. It's very suspicious when Trump and these people they're bought in completely. Then it's stuffing dollars in their pockets and they aren't looking back. So
that's a good point. That is a good point. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the call. All right. Wow, that was great. We got a caller, and I really appreciate it. And just to finish up on the story, it turns out that the huge blackout that happened in Europe last year in Spain and Portugal was actually weakness of the grid. And they had things actually like there were differences in how the different grids, France, Spain, and Portugal, how they dealt with voltage regulation. And so that's partly why they had these big oscillations where the voltage was going up, and then somebody would shift something to make it go down, then it would go way down too far, and another country would shift something else. And so the oscillations kept getting bigger until the voltage crossed a critical point. And at that point, all the generators were like, said, "Oh, the voltage is way too high. I've got to shut down." And they all shut down at once, and that's what caused the huge blackout, not the fact that they were getting wind and solar power. So this was like the most expert panel of experts. There were 49 transmission specialists from regional transmission companies that basically went over every fact, every detail, every minute of the event, and figured out, no, it wasn't wind and sun. It was the way we were running the grid. And so next time you hear one of those anti-renewable people say, "Oh, look at Spain and Portugal," you could just say, it wasn't the wind and sun. That's been proven as much as we can possibly prove it. Okay, well, that's all I wanted to talk about on the show. We have another minute or two here. I just wanted to let everybody know that to ask them to wish me luck, because what I'm going to do today, actually, after the show's over, I'm going to get on a plane. And yeah, I know I don't like getting on planes, but I'm going to Bozeman, Montana, because if everything goes right, everything goes according to plan. I'm knocking on wood here. I will be with our good friend Stephanie C. for a few days out there at Yellowstone, out there with the bison, out there watching the bison and documenting the bison hunt, the terrible things that hunters are doing to our last wild herd of bison in the world. So I'm a little nervous about this. Whenever you go out in the wilderness, whenever you go look at, start interacting with wildlife, there's always some risk, but I have done it before. I did it before, like about 30 years ago. I'm a little more fragile than I was then, but I'm also more cautious. And so I think we'll be all right. But think about us this coming week as we're out there trying to protect the bison. So that's it for this week's show. As I said, hopefully next week we'll have Rebecca back. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare signing off.
Fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do